Good morning, everyone. I'll be talking about basic concepts in statistics which can be applied to your research proposal. Remember, under research methodology, part of it is actually about statistical treatment. And in the statement of the problem, you have to identify the population, and from the population, you're going to take sample if the population is so big. So I'll be talking about the definition of statistics, and then I'll be discussing on the difference between a population and a sample, the difference between a parameter and a statistic. So commonly we have statistics, but we have the term also statistic. But mathematics is all the time mathematics. There is no word as mathematic. But in statistics, we have statistics, we have statistic also. Then distinguish between descriptive statistics and inferential statistics. The descriptive statistics can be used in your research proposal as well as the inferential statistics. So when we talk about statistics, we look at into data. And data could be quantitative or qualitative. And that data consists of information coming from observations, counts, measurements, or responses. So it can be in terms of observations. When you observe someone or something, you're able to collect data. When you count people, when you count trees, when you count dogs, when you count buildings, you're able to collect data. Then we have measurements. When you measure something using a specific instrument, you're able to collect data. And when you give actually a questionnaire to someone or to anyone, and you're able to retrieve that questionnaire, the responses of those different questionnaires that you have retrieved could be classified as part of the so-called data. So data are actually very important in research and in statistics. That's the meat of the statistical perspective. We look at into data. So how do we define statistics in a research-based definition? So we have statistics is the science. So it's a science of collecting, organizing, or presenting, analyzing, and interpreting data in order to make decisions. So decisions can actually be made through the process of collecting data in a scientific manner, through presenting or organizing data in a scientific manner, analyzing the data in a scientific manner, and then interpreting the data in a scientific manner. So, based on the definition, it is a science. In way back high school, way back elementary, or way back in your college days when you were still first year, you're able to define science as a body of knowledge, systematic body of knowledge. So there is actually a system to be followed, a procedure to be followed in the collection, in the presentation or organization, as well as in the analysis and interpretation of the data. And then the other term that we are going to consider, not only in statistics, but also in research, is all about population. So when you are going to have the proposal, see to it that you know the target of your research. Whom are you going to consider your research? And we look up into population. So what is population? Population is the collection of all outcomes, responses, measurements, or counts that are of interest. So take note, collection of all outcomes, of all responses, of all measurements, or all counts that are of interest. So there might be a possibility that the population is so big and that population could not be actually enumerated, And if you can enumerate the members of the population, it would be impossible to collect the data from all members of the population because the population is so big. And it would be impractical to collect the data from each of the members of the population. So for example, the total population of interest is 10,000. So collecting data from each of the 10,000 is actually very expensive. Just imagine if you have 3 pages of a questionnaire, so times 1 peso, 3 pesos, times 10,000, you will be spending 30,000 just for the production of the instrument. And aside from the costly production of the instrument, it would take a long time to collect the data. And if you have collected the data, you will be presenting, you will be organizing, you will be analyzing, and you will be interpreting many data. And the probability of committing an error for a huge or actually a big set of data would be high. Whereas if you're going to use sample is a representative or subset of a certain population. And that is actually smaller than that big population. So it would be easier to collect the data from each of the members of the sample as long as the sample is representative of the total population. So in my next video, I'll be talking about sampling designs. How are you going to determine the sample size? And what are the different techniques in determining the sample size and the sample units? So in this talk, I'm just giving an initial consideration about population and then sample. So when you use sample for the data collection, because the population is so big, then you're able to save time, money, and then effort. It will take a big amount of money if you collect data from that big population. It would take a long time if you are going to collect data from that big population. And more efforts are to be exerted if you're going to collect data from that big population. However, if you have the idea of determining the sample size, then that kind of collecting data from the sample size or from the sample itself would actually save time, money, and then effort. And then you have to look at also into the two branches of statistics. So we have inferential statistics and the descriptive statistics. In terms of descriptive statistics, which are very common in a research proposal or even in a complete thesis or a complete dissertation, or in general in a complete research process, it is actually a branch of stat that is actually focused into the description of the data. You're able to collect the data, you're able to present the data in terms of tables, in terms of graphs. So what you are going to do is to describe the data that you have actually collected. You can actually make use of graph presentation. We have chart presentation or a figure presentation. Or it might be a computation of mean, median, mode, standard deviation, percentages, ranking. All of those are actually parts of descriptive statistics. So from the term itself, descriptive statistics, it only describes the data that you have actually collected and the data that you have actually presented or organized. The second branch of statistics is inferential. So a while ago, I mentioned about collecting data from the sample. And why we collect data from the sample? Because the population is so big. So if you are going to collect data from the sample, then you are going to make generalization on whether what you see on the sample can be generalized to the population where the sample is actually taken. And we call that one as hypothesis testing in inferential statistics. We hypothesize on whether what we see in the sample can be generalized to the population where the sample is actually taken. We look up into the process of making inferences, the process of making conclusions. And in that perspective, very common statistical tools would be t-test, z-test, we have person, product, moment, coefficient of correlation, with the Spearman correlation, the analysis of variance. We have the chi-square. Very common, it is pronounced as chi-square, no, but that's not a chi-square. If you have not taken statistics, when you read the word text, then that would be commonly pronounced as chi-square, and some is actually chi-square, but that's not the correct pronunciation. That's actually chi-square. No? Most of my students are actually having an incorrect pronunciation of that statistical tool. We look at into parametric statistics and non-parametric statistics. So I'm going to end this video with a note that in your research proposal, you have to identify what kind of statistical treatment are you going to consider, what kind of sample, what is the population of your study, is the population big? And if the population is big, you're going to make use of sample. However, if the population is small, then you don't need to use sample. You collect the data from that population. Another term that you are going to consider is that when you collect the data from all members of the population, we call that one a census. Census is a process of collecting data from all members of the population. And then, very common, survey. A survey might be classified as a research design, but in a statistical perspective, a survey is actually a process of collecting data from the members of the sample. So if you conduct a survey, meaning you have identified the sample and you're going to collect the data from the members of the sample. So thank you very much. Have a blessed day to everyone.